Hi there, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to discuss my experience as a 2019 ARIS Fellow. The fellowship project that I chose to work on was to look at offerings for disabled students who are enrolled in biology programs at primarily undergraduate institutions. From the perspective of equity, lack of representation is a serious issue for a nation that prides itself on being diverse and non-discriminatory. Diversity alone, we know, does not de facto create or increase collective wisdom, and it doesn't promote retention in academic programs at undergraduate or graduate levels. Overall, this persistence is more closely correlated with how inclusive the environment is. Nationally, fewer than 40% of undergraduate students who intend to major in STEM complete their degree. This is even lower for underrepresented minorities in STEM. The institutional barriers that contribute to this disparity have been systematically examined with respect to gender, race, and ethnicity. Extensive research is available regarding the impact of transformations to pedagogy, professional development, assessment, and institutional support services that allow us to respond to longstanding achievement gaps. The academic community at large has had an active and productive discussion resulting in slight but noticeable increases in URM recruitment and graduation rates. Similar and related barriers to recruitment and retention of students with disabilities in higher education exist, but far less research is focused on this population, especially within the STEM disciplines. Individuals with disabilities comprise 14% of the public school K-12 enrollment. In 2016, according to NSF, 19.5% of undergraduate students reported a disability. 28% of undergraduate students with one or more disabilities were enrolled in science and engineering fields, which is about the same proportion as those without disabilities. Of these, 7.2% were enrolled in the life sciences. The disability type was varied, with 2.7% of these individuals who were visually impaired, 1% with hearing difficulties, 0.4% with walking or lifting disabilities, and 3.8% with cognitive difficulties. Since it's well recognized that college education in any form is considered an effective means of reducing the negative consequences related to disability, minority status, gender, or socioeconomic status, it is vital that the educational system provide equal and inclusive access for students to pursue careers that best fit their interests, strengths, and passions. The project goal of this fellowship was to investigate resources that are available to faculty, staff, and administrators that address how best to approach education in biology for students with disabilities. The drive for the fellowship began when I was reviewing the literature for the purposes of assisting students with accommodations enrolled in my own general biology course sequence, in particular the laboratory portion of the course. I noticed there was a limited number of programs in higher ed that had been established, with many more for K through 12. The programs that were developed for STEM students were generally housed at larger universities with assumedly more administrative and staff support. For small institutions such as my own with fewer staff and resources, implementing many of these programs is quite difficult. Faculty are often overwhelmed with duties outside of the classroom on top of heavy teaching loads, and with an understaffed office of special services, it's unlikely that innovative technologies and pedagogies were investigated and implemented. Additionally, with such a reliance on adjunct faculty, one can't assume that everyone has the same time and access to implement these activities and resources. Some of the issues I wanted to investigate during the fellowship year included the opportunities and support services in biology for students with disability, and if these truly do increase access for those interested in pursuing these careers. Also, how do institutions enhance opportunities for their disabled population to network with researchers and practitioners in the field of biology to really help them develop STEM identity and increase persistence in the field? Also, how do institutions recruit students with disabilities into biology programs? Do they actively recruit students, or is this recruitment equal and inclusive? And if it's not an aim, what limitations do institutions think create these barriers to recruitment? Also, what types of professional development trainings are offered to faculty that enable them to effectively teach and mentor biology students with disabilities? And are there specific assessment tools that are out there to measure the needs of students with disabilities enrolled in biology, very specifically the needs of these students? Over the year, I created and disseminated a nationwide survey to understand how faculty in biology approach and serve students with disabilities, as well to understand their experiences in classroom innovation. I also completed a meta review of resources available to STEM faculty that would allow for discipline-specific innovations and synthesize these efforts into a resource guide for use by educators at institutions that might not have robust support services. Overall, my results taken together indicated that there is a disconnect between the evidence in the literature and reports and how faculty approach innovating pedagogy to serve this population. During the fellowship, I also came across the concept of servingness, as reported in Garcia 2019, as it applies to Hispanic serving institutions. Servingness is conceptualized by the major themes of outcomes, experiences, internal organizational dimensions, and external influences. It predicts that students are best supported by faculty when they employ a more assets-based approach. Servingness promotes an understanding that we all, at our own institutions, are serving students with disabilities without a particular designation, such that exists for HSIs and MSIs. I would really like to continue exploring faculty motivation in serving students with disabilities enrolled in life sciences. Specifically within learning communities, I propose to examine the impacts and roles that recommendations presented in educational research reports and literature play, the institutional relationships between faculty and administration, and any implicit biases and past experiences as they apply to faculty motivation. These learning communities would be comprised of individuals and students charged with examining and curating evidence-based practices in biology laboratories to improve student outcomes for students with disabilities, and also to develop case studies to serve as professional development tools for training and inclusion and diversity in STEM. By focusing on the intersection of why educators develop and implement certain inclusive activities and the evidence that these effectively serve students with disabilities, I think we can inform professional development and assessment services and ultimately contribute to improvements in recruitment, retention, and outcomes for the significantly underrepresented population in higher education, STEM. New knowledge will be generated as we conclude whether servingness is indeed a core motivator for pedagogical approaches and innovations, with a proposition that faculty well-trained and receptive to evidence are best suited to train and mentor biology students with disabilities. Thank you for your time and listening to some of what I learned over this past year.